Without further ado, General Petr Pavel, Chairman of the NATO Military Committee.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of NATO Military Committee, I'd like to express my pleasure to be in Portugal and to visit Allied Command Transformation Joint Analysis and Lessons Learned Center facilities at Monsanto and in Oeiras. Our visit would not have been possible without the generous support of Portuguese military authorities, so my great appreciation. Portugal is a valued ally and makes important contributions to our shared security, on land, in the air, at the sea, and to NATO operations, missions, and activities. Your country will also be playing an increasingly key role in the cyber domain, as NATO's Communications and Information Academy is being built here in Portugal, and as a leader of multinational smart defense project. The main themes of the military committee visit to Allied Command Transformation in Portugal are adaptation and innovation. As the international security environment evolves, NATO must also evolve, adapt, and innovate to keep the operational edge across all domains and to achieve the political and military objectives of the alliance. NATO's Allied Command Transformation and its subordinated commands, headed by General Denis Mercier, lead the alliance's continuous process of developing, integrating, and training innovative concepts, utilizing lessons learned from operations, missions, and activities, doctrines, and capabilities, all in an effort to improve the effectiveness and interoperability of allied and partner military forces in current and especially future employments. Being here at the Joint Analysis and Lessons Learned Center, this entity plays a crucial role in keeping the alliance forward-leaning. Its work reinforces the continuous transformation and modernization of NATO's forces and capabilities. It informs decision-making at the operational and strategic levels. Our visit and discussions over the last 2 days have focused on the ongoing NATO command structure adaptation, long-term strategic military considerations, the use of disruptive technologies, as well as the impact of emerging technologies, both negative and positive, on NATO personnel and operations. We have also discussed the cyberspace domain to gain an enhanced understanding of the focus areas that will require further guidance and decisions by the military committee. Furthermore, we covered the important efforts regarding cyber education, training, exercises, and evaluations. Tomorrow, we will focus our attention on the challenges in the maritime domain, as well as on NATO's strengthened maritime capabilities. I look forward to the discussions with our experts from NATO's Maritime Command and Naval Striking and Support Forces NATO based here in Portugal. The military committee's visit to Portugal dealing with transformational issues is very timely, as our discussions will be reflected in products for the July NATO summit and beyond. NATO must be prepared as much for the now as for the future. With an ever-changing and complex security environment affecting strategic assumptions, it is essential that we operate and adapt at the same time. I cannot forget mentioning my and General Mercier's very useful meetings with your Minister of Defense and the Chief of Defense, where we focused on topical issues related to security. Before I hand the floor over to General Denis Mercier, I would like to thank him and his staff for organizing this very stimulating and fruitful visit. Big thanks also go to JALLC Commander Brigadier General Barreto and his staff for very warm hospitality here. So with that introduction, let me now pass the floor to Denis Mercier.
Thank you very much, Peter, and ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for us, Allied Command Transformation, to receive General Pavel and the Military Committee here in the Joint Analysis and Lessons Learned Center. As I mentioned yesterday in my introductory remarks, I said that there are different ways to visit Allied Command Transformation. The traditional way is to come to Norfolk and cross the Atlantic, but it was important this time that the military committee visit could happen here in the Joint Analysis and License Center. Why? Because it's a very important center for our alliance. And we started the discussion with the military committee about the licensement process and the description on how, in a few months, the Joint Analysis and License Center, they reorganize themselves in order to build this licensement process as a very robust process necessary for our alliance to be a real learning organization, learning from its all its activities. And during these visits, we were pleased to describe some of the major topics we are discussing now in NATO. And as General Pavel mentioned, it started with the adaptation, and especially with a focus on the adaptation of Allied Command Transformation, in order to be sure that we are ready to prepare future operations. And this is really this differences of roles, responsibilities, and authorities between Allied Command Operation, focusing on today's operation, and Allied Command Transformation, looking at the future that led the process of adaptation that we are conducted. And then, logically, we followed with some of the main documents that we are working on in order to look at this future. And this morning we had a very interesting discussion on disruptive technologies and how we develop a culture of innovation in our alliance, and what is a part of the human capital in this adaptation, followed by discussions on cyber. So this discussion we had led us to see how we maybe engage more often the military committee on these issues, as we saw a real value to build together a stronger military vision for the adaptation of our alliance. And just to conclude on the personal side, I would like to say that I'm also very pleased to be here at the moment where General Arthur Monteiro, the Chief of General Staff of the Portuguese Armed Forces, is leaving. He is a great leader. I have always appreciated his leadership, and he happened to be a good friend. And I think all of us will recognize that we are happy to be here this week and to be with him for this important moment that marks the end of his career. Thank you.
Thank you. So now the question and answer session. If you can please state your name and the media you represent. Okay, lady in the back.
Anna Rodriguez from Renaissance Radio. Can you explain, please, a little bit more, which is the role of ACT in this transformation process of the alliance?
In fact, this is an adaptation of the alliance, and when I have people visiting Allied Command Transformation, I always receive the same question: what is transformation? And my answer is always the same: it's not the right question. The right question is, what do we transform? And you know that what is behind the adaptation we are conducting is that whilst the strategic concept is still valid, especially the three quarters define the strategic concept that has been issued in 2010 by our alliance. Many of the strategic assumptions have changed. And this is why we need to adapt, especially our NATO command structure. However, what we are sure of is these strategic assumptions will keep being challenged and at a very high pace. And we need to be sure that if we want our adaptation to stay relevant, we need to continue to adapt to the current situation, but we need to have the flexibility to adapt to any future challenges. And this is exactly the role of Allied Command Transformation. And we are reorganizing our command in order to be sure that this role prepares NATO to any future challenges and any future type of crisis.
Lady in the corner, please.
Hello, I'm Lisa Meidels from Expresso Weekly. I'd like to know if you are here to discuss both the future development of the alliance, such as the NATO command structure. I would like to know if there is already some decision, namely about the command structure and about the maritime command, and well, if you have already decided something about it.
Okay, let me take this question.
Mic repositioning.
Now, you are probably aware that just about 10 days ago there was a meeting of defense ministers in Brussels where they were presented with the design of adapted NATO command structure. This design is not a detailed reorganization plan. Strategic commanders will work on a detailed implementation plan that will be ready for defense ministers in June and then later for the summit. In the meantime, we have 2 new entities proposed and agreed, and we only have working titles, so don't take it as final. It's 3rd Joint Force Command Atlantic, after 2 Joint Force Commands in Brunssum and Naples. And 2nd new entity is called Joint Support and Enablement Command, again, working title. There are no decisions on geography. There are no decisions on numbers or subordinate commands changes. All this will be subject of development of detailed plans.
So it means that you will be, first you will decide this Joint Force Command Atlantic and this Joint Support Naval Command. Is that it?
Yes. Yeah.
The final decision will be in the summit?
No, the decision to establish these 2 commands was taken. So there will be no discussion if, but how and where.
Ah, okay. This how and where will be decided
By summer, yes.
Summer summit.
Means first ministerial meeting in June and then summit in July.
Yes, RTP, please.
Ricardo Alexandre from RTP. General Mercier, taking into account what you have just said, that the question should be what to transform. My question is NATO considering a transformation of its main headquarters in Europe? Northwood, Ramstein, Izmir, because the capabilities there are not responsive anymore to the current challenges?
In fact, the command you mentioned are not exactly under my responsibility, but I can answer that. In fact, this is as I mentioned, an adaptation of the NATO command structure. And the adaptation has as principles how we operate today, and what needs adaptation to operate today, and how we adapt to the future. And this is what I mentioned, is more the role of Allied Command transformation. Those commands you have mentioned will remain in place, but there are functions that we have identified that needs adaptation, especially to improve our responsiveness. Those functions are how we organize the logistics in the theater area, so the joint support and enabling command. Those functions are, in case we have an increasing crisis that goes to a conflict, how we secure the sea lines of communication across the Atlantic, so the new maritime command. The question is how to implement cyber in our structure. And this is something we have discussed today. And the question is how we implement many other functions that, in order to deal with today's environment, with today's complexity, and to be sure that we are very responsive. That's really what is behind this adaptation. And again, for Allied Command transformation, it's important that we see how we continue to present alternative options to our stakeholders in order to adapt permanently our structure to the future. And between Allied Command Operation and Allied Command Transformation, we had three main functions that we had to reorganize. The one is how we develop capabilities, and the recommendation of capabilities for our nations, and the commonly funded capabilities. The second is how we deal with partnership, and the third was how we organize exercises.
Let me just get back to those three places. Is it reasonable to think about any kind of adaptation, as you mentioned, in Izmir, while there is a tense relation between Turkey and some of the Western partners?
There was no reason that we reopen the footprint, and this is why we have adapted the NATO command structure without touching the footprint that exists already, because this footprint is still relevant. But the question was how we adapted the functions inside this footprint. And inside this footprint, we have, for instance, single components: Landcom in Turkey, Marcom in UK, and Aircom in Ramstein in Germany. And inside this footprint, we conducted the adaptation, but the footprint itself, we decided not to touch it, because it's still relevant.
Yes, please, lady over there.
Sónia Ferreira, Lusa News Agency. I'd like to know if in this framework that is being studied for the two new commands, it is expected that Strike for NATO will be reinforced, with functions can be added. And the second question is, in this process, what do you expect from Portugal, from the Portuguese government, not only in the budget issue, but in the general?
Let's first start with the question on Strike for NATO. There is no discussion about changing the role of Strike for NATO or changing the location. As the General stated, we are discussing primarily the functions and how to strengthen the functions of the headquarters if they cover a full spectrum that is required by a new security situation. If there are to be some adjustments, minor adjustments to the roles, will come out of the development of implementation plan. But there will be no major change to Strike for NATO. As for role of Portugal and defense spending and related issues, Portugal, as any other NATO ally, is now asked to meet the commitments made in Wales and strengthened in Warsaw and in Brussels last year. That means to spend 2% on defense, out of it 20% on modernization by 2024. All nations are now striving to develop their national plans, how to meet these commitments. And as Secretary General stated recently at the ministerial meeting, what is crucially important that we do not focus only on the numbers, but that we focus on what he is calling 3 C's. It means cash, capability, and commitments. If I put it very simply, we have to spend more to buy the capabilities that will be then used to meet our commitments later on. So all the 3 are equally important, and nations will be refining their national plans towards the summit.
Any further questions? Yes, one more? Okay.
What do you think about the process of sharing learned lessons? Have you detected any problems in the allies sharing the lessons?
I will be now stealing from General Mercier because it is his business, so I will allow him to reshuffle again.
And in fact, yes, there are some problems, and this is why we are adapting the process. And the first thing is that we have seen that in our NATO organization, we have very different databases regarding license that we have identified in exercises in operation, and they are in different locations. And based on that, it's very difficult to have a very comprehensive assessment of this license. So what we have created, and thanks to the effort of the Joint Analysis and License Lot Center, is a single portal. And this single portal is in place since November, and it has access to all the database. And even the aim of this portal now is to not only have access to all the database that exist in NATO, but to have access to the database that exists in our nations, providing that they want to share with us, and have access to share lessons learned with the European Union and with other organizations. And this is now what we are conducting. And thanks to the vision that we want to develop, and that was proposed to me by the Joint Analysis and License Center, in the future we can do more than that. We have this database, we have this observation, we have this lesson identified. But if in the same place we can link the campaign plans, we can link the concept, we can link the doctrines, and then we can use big data analytics, and with a level of artificial intelligence in the future, we will be very reactive to identify the lessons and make corrective actions. And this is the aim. So that will require adaptation, that will require discussion with the industry, and there will be by the fall of this year here in Lisbon a conference in which we will start looking at this, but this is a way to permanently implement this important process for our alliance. Again, we are an organization that wants to learn from all the lessons we have identified in all of our activities, but we need to do that now with the tools of the 21st century. And this is the ambition for the center.
We have space for one more question, if there is one. If that's not the case, thank you very much for coming.